Continuing now with The Final Days by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. I have a little different look because I have decided I just came across some reading glasses I'd forgotten I'd bought a good while back, and thought maybe they will make my reading a little smoother in this book, so we'll see how it goes. So now we're moving on to Sunday, August 4th. We're just 4 days out from the day that President Nixon finally announces his resignation. The evidence that the president had chosen a disastrous course was in the speech that Price brought to Buchanan's office at 9 o'clock in the morning. It confirmed Buchanan's worst fears. What had started as a speech of resignation was now a statement of defiance. The president intended to tell the nation that nothing save conviction by the Senate would cause him to leave the office to which he had been elected. Buchanan shook his head as he read. Though I have lost my base of political support, I will fight for the principle. I will appear in the Senate in person and will carry this struggle to the final conclusion. The president was committing himself to final devastation, Buchanan told Price. He can't box himself in like that. Price did not need convincing, he had reminded Buchanan. He was only doing his job, following instructions. They agreed that Buchanan should write a memo to Haig, and they drafted it together. It was directed to the immediate problem, keeping the president from making a public vow to fight to the finish. The president shouldn't lock himself into a pledge to appear before the Senate. There was absolutely no gain in that, they wrote. Nor should he go on television on Monday night. If Nixon couldn't be dissuaded from appearing before the cameras, he should limit himself to a 3-minute film statement in the press room, in which he merely laid out the contents of the June 23rd tape. Buchanan scrawled a draft of the final paragraph on a notepad. Don't lock him into any statement going all the way. We've been unable to convince him to resign, but events will. Drop the tape and let the tape and the consequences convince him of what we can't. Then he and Price made a few language changes and dictated the memo to Margaret Foote. It's for the old man's sake, Buchanan told Price. For the future, it would be a terrible thing if we were to talk him into something he doesn't think he ought to do. For the rest of his life, he would say, I was talked into it by advisors and I could have made it. We should step back and let the thing blow. The president should feel the force of the blast himself. Let him see reality himself. Price left to get ready to go to Camp David that afternoon. Buchanan was not scheduled to go, but now he wanted to be there. He called Haig's office to tell the general that he was available if wanted. While he waited for Haig's call, Buchanan changed into a pair of jogging trunks. Haig's office called just as he had laced up his new blue and white track shoes. Buchanan would go to Camp David. He phoned Shelley and asked her to bring a jacket and tie to the office. Then he went out of the EOB through the basement, only a few feet from the office where Howard Hunt and the plumbers had worked, and jogged down 17th Street to Constitution Avenue, west to the Lincoln Memorial, east on Independence Avenue to the Jefferson Memorial. He jogged past the Washington Monument onto the ellipse with its view of the White House, South Portico. He slowed down only at the guard post on West Executive Avenue between the White House and the EOB as he went back through the iron gates. This Sunday's secretarial shift in Haig's office had been drawn by Diana Gwynn, Assistant to Staff Secretary Jerry Jones. Wardell, Haig's aide, had asked her to sit in the outer office and answer the phones. Gwynn thought the general looked unusually strained when he and Julwan arrived around 9:30. Haig fussed and fretted over one more problem, the weather. It was raining, making it doubtful that they could helicopter to Camp David. Wardell made alternate plans to drive. He knew the real source of Haig's agitation. On Wednesday, Haig had told him about the tape. I'm not sure I can justify my actions, the general had said. Gwynn asked Wardell what was going on. Just wait, he replied. The shit is going to hit the fan. There's a damaging tape coming out tomorrow. Gwynn and Wardell began calling it the killer tape. As the noon hour approached, the weather broke. The passengers were hurriedly assembled for the drive to the Pentagon helipad. Ziegler, Pat and Shelley Buchanan, Price, Julwan, St. Clair and his wife, Haig and his wife. Climbing into the limousine, Haig looked up at the bright sky and threw a disgusted look at Wardell before shutting the door. Ziegler and the speechwriter shared the second car. Buchanan handed Ziegler a copy of the memo and said that Price was in agreement. Glumly, Ziegler nodded his assent to each of the points up to the final one, that resignation was inevitable. I agree with the whole thing except the last paragraph, he said. Buchanan was used to Ziegler's habit of never revealing whether his words reflected his own thoughts or the president's. At least he was now on board against a public pledge to fight it out. Inside the helicopter, Buchanan handed the memo to Haig. Haig read it quickly. The two-step strategy, releasing the tape and then letting events convince the president, appealed to Haig. I agree with you, he said, passing the page back over his shoulder to Buchanan. Buchanan gave it to St. Clair, seated beside him. He hoped that the wait-and-see approach would appeal to the lawyer's natural caution and dampen some of St. Clair's recent enthusiasm for a Senate battle. St. Clair, however, made another of his sharp turns. He rejected the recommendations and proceeded to outline his latest position. He's got to resign tomorrow. Those who counseled otherwise were no longer serving the interests of the nation. They all argued with him, shouting to be heard over the noise of the helicopter's engines. When they arrived at Camp David, Haig went immediately to Aspen Cabin to join the president. Buchanan, Price, St. Clair, and Ziegler went to Birch Cabin and resumed their rancorous discussion. As the argument grew more heated, Buchanan concluded that St. Clair's latest turnabout was based largely on a personal concern for his professional reputation. Ziegler was terribly excited. Resignation the next day was out of the question. An attempt to force the president's hand would fail and might even end in disaster. The president, he said, was not convinced that the June 23rd tape was fatal. Buchanan believed that the way to Nixon was through Ziegler, and he wanted to maneuver himself into a more moderate position between St. Clair's resignation now and those willing to fight. To this end, he stepped up his attack on St. Clair. Drop the tape and he'll come around in a week or 10 days, and the country will be a hell of a lot better off that way. The country would need time for the tape to sink in and bring most people around to the same conclusion Nixon would have to reach. Resignation would be inevitable. St. Clair was not convinced. How much punishment can one person take? How much can the country take? We're not serving the president if we let him go through with this. But, Jim, I told him to resign 3 ways, Buchanan said, through Al, Beebe, and the family. In half an hour, Haig came back from Aspen. Al, did the message get through? Buchanan asked. Does the president know where I stand? Yes, Haig replied. Buchanan turned to St. Clair with a look that said, You see? St. Clair started to argue, but Haig cut him off. The president had agreed to scuttle the televised address in favor of a written statement that would be issued the next day along with the transcript. Ziegler went to see the president, and the discussion in Birch Cabin now turned to the written statement. Price went off to work on it. It didn't take him long to figure out what to do. One section of the discarded address was an explanation of the tape. Price picked up his scissors, cut that section out, and redid it more vaguely. The statement would mention neither resignation nor any all-out last-ditch fight. As Price worked, Haig, St. Clair, and Buchanan continued to argue. Telling the president what to do, Haig reminded St. Clair, might trigger the same reaction Griffin's letter had set off the day before, make the man more stubborn. With Haig applying pressure, St. Clair retreated. Haig and St. Clair would brief the loyalists on the committee Monday. But that still left John Rhodes out in the open. Rhodes had scheduled a press conference for Monday and had assured the White House that he would direct the anti-impeachment forces in the House debate. You can't keep the guy out on a hook like that, Buchanan said. Haig went to call Rhodes. There are some developments that I can't talk to you about, he told him, but I would advise you very strongly to cancel your press conference. Rhodes thought he had never heard anyone so downhearted. When will I know what this is all about, he asked gently. You will know tomorrow, Haig replied. I will have you briefed. Rhodes thanked the general and called Jay Smith, his press aide. He told Smith to cancel the conference. I think it might be resignation, he said. The entourage came together shortly after 2 for lunch in Laurel Lodge. The president had insisted that some of the wives come to Camp David that Sunday afternoon, and Patricia Haig and Billy St. Clair had spent the past few hours picking wild strawberries. There was almost a picnic atmosphere, and their husbands were determined that during lunch at least it stay that way. Prime minute steaks, a frequent item on the Camp David menu, were served with fresh vegetables. The conversation was purposefully light. After the stewards had served apple pie a la mode and coffee, the men moved to the cabinet room in Laurel and went over Price's work. He had outlined the basic elements of the next day's statement. 1. While reviewing tapes to be turned over in compliance with the Supreme Court decision, the president discovered a serious omission in his previous statements about Watergate. 2. His review disclosed that on June 23, 1972, he ordered the FBI's investigation to stop, not only for national security reasons, but for political reasons as well. 3. Therefore, complete transcripts of the June 23rd conversations were being supplied to the House Judiciary Committee, which had conducted its deliberations on the basis of incomplete and erroneous information. 4. A House vote of impeachment was foregone. Therefore, the issue would go to trial in the Senate. To ensure that no more relevant information was overlooked, the president would voluntarily furnish the Senate with all material that had been turned over to the special prosecutor. 5. While recognizing the damage done his case by this disclosure, the president remained convinced that the record in its entirety did not justify the extreme step of impeachment and conviction of a president. Whatever mistakes he made in his handling of Watergate, the basic truth remained that, when all the facts were brought to his attention, he insisted on a thorough investigation and prosecution of the guilty. Price was pleased with his draft and thought it expressed his deep belief that the president's actions 6 days after the Watergate break-in were innocent in intent and that nothing Nixon had done merited impeachment. Buchanan was satisfied that the president was not committing himself to wage all-out war. Whatever words Price chose to soften the harsh facts, Buchanan thought there could be no mistaking the impact such a statement would have. It did, however, leave the president a little room. Haig was not satisfied. It wasn't accurate, for one. It implied that Nixon hadn't listened to the tape until after the Supreme Court decision. The fact was that he had heard it sometime during May. Price and Buchanan were confused. Why had he listened to it in May? Haig explained. The president was at that time responding to Jaworski's compromise offer to settle for certain tapes in return for keeping secret Nixon's status as an unindicted co-conspirator. Bizart, St. Clair, and he were all involved in the May thing. The statement must make it clear that they were not aware that the president had turned down Jaworski's offer as a consequence of listening to the June 23rd tape. Buchanan and Price were outraged. They and a lot of other people had put their own reputations on the line defending the president and saying things that Nixon knew were false. Ziegler defended the president. Nixon had not listened until after the Supreme Court decision. They were wrong. He rushed off to check with the boss. Haig decided to do his own checking. He had Joe Wan call Wardell and have him consult the log for May 5th to be certain that that was the day St. Clair and he had heard Jaworski outline his proposal. Joe Wan returned a few minutes later. Affirmative. Next, Haig picked up the phone to find those who could pinpoint the date the president listened to the tape: Bull, Shepard, and Bizart. He had reached the first two and was getting ready to call Bizart when Ziegler returned. They fit together for Ziegler the pieces they had already found. Jaworski, Haig, and St. Clair met on May 5th. According to Bull and Shepard, the president listened to the tape on May 6th. The next day, the president instructed St. Clair to turn down the offer. Ziegler shouted that they were wrong. The president says he didn't listen to it then. It was late in May. They were all jumping to the wrong conclusion. Look, Ron, Buchanan said, his voice rising, we've got the records. The only date they were checked out was on May 6th. Here's the Jaworski thing at the same time. There's no other conclusion. I don't believe that, Ziegler said shrilly. The president says it was the other way. That the tape had been checked out was simply no proof that the president had actually listened to it. And even if he had not recognized its significance, Ziegler added. But he was all by himself on this one. Haig didn't bother to dispute him. He called Bizart at the White House. Had the president listened to the June 23rd conversation when he was reviewing tapes? Which time, Bizart asked, January or May? Either. Bizart checked his own notes. They indicated that the president listened to the tape on May 6th, he said. Haig told him about the argument they were having and what Ziegler was claiming. Bizart said that there was one other piece of information of crucial significance. Only 12 days ago, on July 24th, as Haig might recall, the president had specifically asked Bizart to listen to the June 23rd, 1972 tape. There could be no doubt that the president had already heard the tape. Otherwise, he could not have singled it out as a potential problem. That was the clincher for Buchanan. Price, and St. Clair, but Ziegler persisted. He needed to be absolutely certain to verify their thesis personally. Although Haig thought it was a waste of time, he agreed to a meeting with Bull and Bazart that evening at the White House. He called Bull, but he was not at the White House. It was about 6 p.m. when he was finally located. "I'm leaving Camp David shortly, and I would like to see you and Jerry Jones in my office at 8, Haig told him. Jones was responsible for the record-keeping of the tapes. As Bull got ready to go back to the White House, he received another call, this time from the president. How sure was Bull that he, Nixon, had listened to the tape on May 6th? Quite certain. "Are you sure?" the president demanded. "I thought it was later." "Impossible," said Bull. "It was in the notes." "Was it possible that Bull had cued that tape but that the president had not listened to it?" "No, Mr. President, I remember the day well. The tape counter indicated that the president had actually listened to the tape, not just that the machine had been set up. There was no question," Bull assured him. When Bull arrived at the White House, no one but Jones was there, but soon the party from Camp David returned. Bazart walked into Haig's office with them. Haig asked Jones when the president had received the June 23rd tape. It had been checked out to Bull on May 6th. Haig turned to Bull. When did he listen to it? As Bull was rechecking his notes, Price said to him, "It's very important." "It might be fatal," Haig added. Bull looked at his interrogators. "My notes show that the president heard it on May 6th. "Who knows about it?" Haig asked. Bull had told it to the grand jury when he testified on June 6th. He had also turned over his notes. Bull expected Haig to be angry with him. He was not. Haig paused. Everybody waited. "Okay, that's it," he said. "An act probably fatal." His tone was resigned. There was nothing more to discuss. Ziegler had stopped arguing. After Bull and Jones had left, the others went back to Price's draft. Haig handed Bazart a copy and filled him in on how things had gone at Camp David. The president was insisting that he had not listened to the tape and that he wanted the statement to back him up. Haig's face asked, "Can you believe that?" Bazart shook his head sadly. The statement could not say that the president had not listened to the tape because the notes said the opposite, and both the special prosecutor and the grand jury had the notes. The group worked toward what they hoped would be an acceptable compromise. Price could write that the president had reviewed the tapes in May but would not say precisely when. That might be enough. It would skirt the issue. For Haig and St. Clair, though, that was not enough. They insisted that the president say that he had not told them at the time what was on the tape. St. Clair was determined that the president also take responsibility for withholding that tape from the special prosecutor and the House Judiciary Committee. They were talking to the president through Ziegler. The president had to stop denying facts that were already on record, and he had to clarify their situation once and for all. Bazart thought Haig and St. Clair were coming close to threatening to resign. He tried to calm them. Quietly, he reminded them that they had all agreed not to do anything to force a resignation, that resignation had to be a willing act on the president's part, that Nixon, above all, must see it as such. Price would work something out, Bazart assured them. Haig and St. Clair relented. The discussion turned to how to work out the two-step strategy. What had to be done the next day? Who would have to be briefed before the transcript hit? Haig began making calls right after the meeting. He reached Treasury Secretary William Simon and told him, "I've got bad news. It may be fatal to the president." He described the transcript. There would also be a statement by the president offering his explanation, but that was still in the works. Haig's frustration boiled over as he told Simon what had to be included in the statement. Bazart, St. Clair, and he were all resigning if the president doesn't lay it on the line. And we come to the end of Sunday, August 4th, and we're also just almost to the 20-minute mark, so we'll stop there with this session, and it's getting close, friends. So in the next session, we will take up Monday, August 5th, and that's when things really hit the fan. In the Final Days by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. Thanks for watching.